Welcome to the Dr. Nikki Starr Show, a podcast to support you in your spiritual awakening and personal development. As a spiritual teacher, healer, and intuitive coach, my intention is to empower you to live your ultimate potential and your ultimate life. As a former medical doctor and mystic, my role is to bridge the gap between science and spirituality to support you in understanding more of your multidimensional aspects. I share on a diverse range of topics, and it's all to support your greatest becoming. My mission is to continue reaching millions of people for the healing and awakening of humankind for the creation of the new earth. Thank you for being here. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Dr. Nikki Starr Show. Today, I have with me Denon Maximchuk. He is a relationship coach, and today we're going to be talking about creating secure attachment and how to do that to enhance our relationships. And as you know, this is the season of the podcast where we are talking all things that will support the healing of the man-woman relationship for greater union. So welcome, Denon, and please introduce yourself a bit more in terms of who you are, what you do, and the short version of how you got started on this path.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me on. So for me, I'd say I can remember back when I really take my memory back. For me, it actually started when I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. And it's taken many, many years in my healing journey to actually go back and map out the patterns of where my attachment styles, started to really go wrong in the first place. But I'd say my healing journey probably started about 5 years ago, where looking into kind of like where things really started to go off the cliff for me was I was in a relationship. My partner and I had a very successful health coaching company for women. Specifically, we worked with like diagnostic health stuff specifically around women. And this was during COVID where we really popped this off, and lots of people were taking it extremely seriously. And, I was sitting there as a young man thinking, damn, I made it. I got the girl. We got the business. All these things are going so well. But it's one of those things where you don't know your blind spots till you find them out later on. And one day she comes to me and goes, I don't think we're right for each other. And basically that came after a many culmination of conversations about children, the future that we want, and all of the things that would guide our entire future together. And to be honest with you, I was lying to myself and I was saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a great dad. I'm going to want all these things. I want kids in the next 2 years, when really I didn't. All of these things that I was doing as a people pleaser, as a nice guy, as a deeply anxiously attached individual, in order to feel like I had to earn love from this person. And looking back, I kind of think that my life was just a massive haze of exactly that: people pleasing, anxious attachment, doing crazy behaviors that I don't ever want to admit publicly on a podcast that I was doing. And that was kind of the moment where life fell apart. I mean, over the coming months, obviously, I lost my best friend. I lost basically my entire vision of the future. I separated from the business and had to figure out my entire life. And I basically had to start my entire healing process on my own. And I didn't know what the journey was going to look like, but I basically poured as much money as I could possibly put, which was basically the extent of my credit cards, into getting coaches, into books, into courses, into everything I possibly could, because the story in my mind was, and I'm sure we'll come back to stories later, I never want to feel this kind of pain in my life again. And so I had no intention of helping people with their relationships and their attachment styles and their own personal growth journeys. But that was the start of it, was essentially starting to awaken to myself, to see my blind spots, to see all of the areas that I was borderline delusional with myself about what I was really wanting and the way that I was acting. I say borderline, it was actually full blown. And then one day, probably after 6 to 8 months of hiring coaches and whatnot, I learned what attachment styles were. And that's when I started to put the pieces together. And I went, holy smokes, you are severely anxiously attached. And when I started to map things back, I realized around the age of about 4 or 5 years old, my parents did an amazing job raising me. But there was a few key moments that always came to me in meditations, in exercises that I would do. And I remember one very clearly, which was my mother was a paramedic. And she would work 4 days on and 4 days off. And already having that kind of like instability at a young age with the mother being there and not starts to create questions for the child. You start to have to create survival strategies and stories in your mind as to, okay, how do I deal with this? And so, truthfully, I actually developed what's called a disorganized attachment, which is a fearful avoidant. I would cling and cling and cling because I didn't want her to leave and go to work. And I was confused. Why don't you love me? Why do you leave? As a child, you don't understand that. And then once she would leave, I would entirely disconnect and go numb for 4 days until she returned, and to which I would cling as hard as I possibly could. And this started to create a cycle of anxiously attaching when she's there and trying to be the good boy, get the best grades, perform the best in school, do whatever you need to do to be loved, in hopes that they wouldn't leave. And then once they left, or once there was any sort of space or distance, or she was angry at me, sometimes completely disconnect in my mind. And that was the avoidance side starting to come out. So I started to learn two separate patterns. And typically when I'm online talking about this, I only talk about one or the other, because when both are combined is when things start to get a little squirrely. But that's when I started to trace back my map and realize, wow, this all started as a survival strategy to gain love and essentially create safety as a child in the home. And that's pretty much my story. And yeah, one day I'd end up helping people. Who knew? It was never the plan.
Yeah, and you're really speaking to truth in the sense that we become experts of what we heal through, what we go through. And so, what better relationship coach than for someone who went through a challenging relationship, felt all that pain, healed through it, understands coping mechanisms, healing strategies, ways to evolve and really tap into greater love and self-worth. And so today we're going to talk about all of these different things. And we have had past episodes where we talked about anxious and avoidant attachment, for example. So in this episode specifically, I do want to focus on how to create secure attachment. And so I have found that a lot of our healing work in relation to relationship is about going back to our childhood. And I really believe in the imago model. Did you, in your studies, in your healing journey, did you hear about imago work? Okay, so that
Teach
could be
me.
a cool. Yeah, so it's really a beautiful model, which I'm sure you already know about, and maybe you've seen it in other ways. But Hendrix Harville and his wife, were Stanford professors, and they are PhDs and have worked in the relationship world. And they wrote the book, Getting the Love You Want. And it's basically about how we choose partners that really are very similar to one or both of our parents, both the positive qualities and the ones that challenge us. And we choose these partners because we want to heal that aspect that we lived in childhood. So, for example, in the case that you described, you would find a woman kind of like your mother so that you could then get the love that you always really wanted from your mother. And I find it to be really fascinating, and it's really intelligent because it helps us to look at where there's wounds within ourselves, and so that we can then heal them. And I find that healing work for me has been the most powerful thing in terms of attracting partners that are better and better suited. And I always believe that it's a journey. Our relationship, like every relationship, we do our healing work, every relationship will get better and better and better. If we don't, and we just think, oh, it's them, it's their fault, they're the ones that wrong me, then we kind of continue to loop in these cycles of these same kinds of relationship. So I know for me, I'm like, have you looked at your childhood wounds? Have you gone back and just by doing timeline healing, soul retrievals, relationship healing, even forgiveness rituals, I have found that I become even more securely attached. I know that I tend to be more anxious as well. And it makes sense because my parents were like teenagers when they had me, and my parents were divorced at a young age. And so then with my father going away, I felt that abandonment. And so there was this feeling, and so because of this aspect, it's like then I would attract situations and partners. But over time, that got less and less as I looked more at myself. So when you are working with clients who really want to become securely attached, what are some of the things that you recommend to support people to do that?
First of all, I just want to shout out to how amazing of a speaker you are. I am becoming anxious as we're speaking based on how great you are at this. I can tell that you do this as a job. It's incredible. Well, I think one thing to touch on real quick there, you're welcome. I think one thing to touch on real quick there is exactly what you talked about we create these stories many times in our minds as we're growing up. And, I have this conversation with men and women all the time. And it's always a really awkward starting point when they essentially go, hold on, wait. I'm trying to date my dad. I'm like, oh, when we put it that way, like, yeah, you kind of are. And so it can be a little uncomfortable at first because people really get called out in a way that is extremely uncomfortable. So I usually try to like play around with that and we can laugh at it a little bit. But a lot of it starts just with the stories that we build in order to match what the body is learning at a certain time, right? So like the anxious story is maybe if I don't try harder, I'm going to be left. And maybe the avoidance story is going to be something like, look, if I let you in, I've done that to people before. I've let people in, and I know because I've seen this, and I'm going to create this story for myself that I'm going to be controlled, and you're going to hurt me if I let you that close to me. And these stories that people have they feel true, I should say, is because they did at one point in time solve a pain point in their journey. And so mapping those things back are going to be some of the first most important things. As you talked about, when you heal more, you find yourself attracting better people. And this, I always say, the relationship to others begins with the relationship to self. And we need to first have an incredible relationship with ourselves. And so one of the ways when I actually like to take a bit more of a meta approach to this in the beginning. I'm trying to learn how to like go away from this, but in truth, my journey actually started more spiritually than it did scientifically. And so perhaps this isn't exactly how I would approach this with every person, but for anybody listening right now, one of my first mentors, he explained to me a really, really cool story about the dog and the dog owner. And do you mind if I tell the story?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't
Cool.
mind.
So I found this to be a really good. Okay. I found this to be a really great story to kind of allow ourselves to almost zoom out a little bit and see ourselves from a different perspective. And the way the story goes is if anybody here's ever owned a dog or picked up a puppy from like the SPCA, or at least that's what they're called in Canada where I'm from. Basically, it's a rescue puppy. And you show up to adopt this beautiful puppy, and maybe it's like 1 to 2 years old, but it's lived the first year of its life on the street, or maybe in a house where it wasn't treated really well, or any of these situations that would cause the dog to already have these built up patterns in its mind as far as how life works and how this little puppy has to survive. And so we look at this puppy with love and we go, oh my gosh, I'm going to take you on the best walks. I'm going to take you to eat the best food. I'm going to love you when you're scared. When the lightning strikes and you pee on the carpet, it's going to piss me off, but I'm still going to love you because I understand why you did that. You didn't know any better. And then, we take the puppy home and we try to open up the crate. Maybe it bites at our fingers because that's all it knows when somebody reaches out towards the dog. All it knows is to fight back. It's its nervous system programmed and automated to do these things. Its default states, in other words. And then, you let the puppy out and, maybe hides under the bed for a couple of days. How many times in dating have you hid under the bed metaphorically around a person, being afraid to be out there, right? And eventually the puppy dog starts to warm up and be okay, so long as it's treated well and shown a new way. But we are able to look at this conditioned animal from a different perspective. And because it's not us. Because what you wouldn't do when the puppy pees on the carpet or barks loud at you or does all of these things that, might be unsavory in the moment, but we don't kick the dog. We don't yell at the dog. We don't do any of these things. But how many of you are doing that to yourselves, right? You're doing this to all of your conditioned and programmed stories that you are allowing to come out, obviously, in the moments because that's all you know what to do. But then you hate yourself for it. And you beat the shit out of yourself for all of these things that you unconsciously do because that's how you've learned to survive. And so this story I really think it helps us to zoom out and be able to take a different look at the way that we look at self-love and self-acceptance, because I don't believe that self-love is this, frou-frou bubble bath kind of way that I think it's been romanticized in Hollywood films nowadays. Self-love is actually responsibility. And the same way that we have the responsibility to nurture and love and feed and exercise the puppy dog, and to show it a new way of living in this secure home where it's going to be treated well, we have to first do that for ourselves. And I think this is kind of the first time that anybody really steps back and goes, wow, oh my gosh, that is me. I do all these things. Why do I do that? And this starts to create the first step of awareness, so we can start breaking down the patterns step by step from there.
Yes, and also even the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and about
Yeah.
situations. The moment we start to choose a different narrative, like even saying like I'm lovable, or I am love and I attract in love that is secure and safe and stable, or whatever affirmations, like whatever kind of love that you want to experience. I have found that, say, even through techniques like tapping, we really can reprogram ourselves and our lives. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What you believe about yourself and life is what you will live. So the moment of the awareness is great, because then it's like, why am I doing that? And it can even be like, I choose to be loved. I choose to allow myself to love. I choose to allow myself to open my heart, to deepen an intimacy and connection, etc. And let's say for someone who's avoidant, for example, or with someone who's anxious, you might be like, I am safe and stable and protected wherever I am, no matter what is happening. Let's say in that moment you start to feel the distance, or I know that I am loved, or whatever it is that creates that, that you don't want them to go, or you feel like you're being abandoned. It's in that moment of like reaffirming whatever it is, because it's going to be different for everyone, whatever it is that you want to experience in relationships. So I know that when I work with clients who have a relationship goal, I often say, what do you actually want in relationship? How do you know that you're living your most successful relationship? What does it feel like? What does it look like? How is the interaction and the dynamic between you and the other? And I think that that's a great place to start, because when you know what you want, then you can measure success. If you're not sure, you're just like, I know this doesn't feel good. It could be a good idea to really start to go within, meditate, reflect, even connect to relationships that you really love and admire, whether it's people in your family or friends, or because there's so many types of relationship that can be had. And by breaking it down and really connecting to what's important to you, then you start to identify values, and then you'll choose a better partner. And I know that people sometimes often are like, oh, well, that means I'm being picky, or I have expectations, or my standards are too high. And then they end up going, and I know I've done this in the past. I'm like, oh, my standards are so high. I was like, maybe I need to relax a little bit more. And then I like shoot myself in the foot, and I'm like, I already knew I didn't want that. Why did I go against my own standards? And
I
that's
thought
also
6'5", blue eyes, and finance was exactly what I wanted.
what's crazy too, is then that's also self-love, to say, no, this is not a match. This behavior, that type of lifestyle, etc., is not a match to what I'm creating. So why am I going to then go back, which is oftentimes something that feels familiar. You already had it, it's not in alignment with you. And then you go into these same types of relationship because they seem familiar, because it's, oh, this is just what's showing up in my reality, versus saying no when it's not aligned and trusting. So I think there's also that patient and deep trust that's required to really attract in your highest match. And that patience and that capacity to say no, I also feel is self-love, and is part of the journey to creating secure attachment and connections that we really love, desire, and want to be living. It's really up to us to say no also in terms of self-love, and I feel creating secure attachment, because every time we say no, it's like we're telling the universe, not that. And we're rewriting our story around relationship when we can say no to a pattern or a dynamic of like, this feels familiar and I don't really want to live that anymore. And so when the next person presents that's the same kind of energy and it feels similar and those anxious feelings are being created, I feel that we also have an opportunity to say no or choose a different action step to then create a new polarity or a new interaction. And so, in terms of when you're actually then in relationship, how do you usually connect or share with clients to create that secure attachment versus continuing to loop in the patterns? Because we know that we are polarizable beings. If I act in a certain way towards you, you will be polarized to act back towards me in a certain way. So for example, like if there's a runner, there's going to be a chaser. So if I don't run, for example, then there's like nothing to chase. So it's almost like patterning ourselves to also show up and respond differently to triggers or stimulus that in the past would trigger us into those anxious or avoidant moments. So what are your thoughts in relation to creating new patterning for more secure attachment?
So I'm just going to add on to a point that I heard you talking about there, which is like when we actually get to the repatterning aspect. And so one of the most important things that I think people overlook is we try to go from a dysregulated state into a highly skilled state. I can almost promise you that's not going to work. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is honestly just trying to layer more and more and more skills on top of a completely dysregulated system. So I know everybody's like, oh, Denon, oh my God, self-soothe. I've read this a million times off of ChatGPT. I know you have, but you are not seriously taking into that the account of the fact that if you can take 90 seconds to consciously think, that can pretty much change your life, whether this is in the boardroom, whether this is in your business, whether this is in your relationship, whether this is the way that you react or respond to your children. Essentially, what we need to build first, the real skill that you need to layer in first is your regulation practices. And so what I mean by this is really this is our ability to respond versus react. Respond versus react to what, though? And this is the biggest thing, which is I got a book over there actually, and I could grab it, but G.S. Youngblood in his book, The Masculine in Relationship, I think it's chapter 5 where he talks about how your masculine core is basically dependent on your ability to become responsive to threat, to anxiety responses, essentially. Because what is anxiety at the end of the day? Anxiety is a loop that our mind is trying to close when there is basically a gap in information. So a gap in information when we're looking at an insecure attachment style for an anxious person might be, oh my God, is this person going to leave me right now? Am I going to be abandoned? Whereas for the avoidant, it's going to be a little bit different. It's, oh my God, I feel pressure. I feel like this person's getting really close to me right now. Am I going to get controlled? Is my autonomy going to be removed? Am I going to get destroyed in whatever way I'm thinking about, which was programmed from my childhood? It all comes back to threat responses. And so honestly, the first skill that you need to map out is, where does my body go into a state of threat? And what I mean by this is, where are we noticing the somatic cues inside of our body, which if you're an avoidant attachment, this might be a lot harder to figure out as compared to the anxious people who are usually highly attuned to these things, especially if, and I've seen this with many avoidant attachment individuals, they have a high propensity to have the ability to intellectually, or in some cases, spiritually bypass. So what I'm saying is logically bypass in some way, shape, or form their internal emotional states. And so what you need to get really good at first and foremost is notice when you're having a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response to some degree of threat in your body, whatever it's perceiving as that. You need to get really, really clear on the things that shut you down and basically stop you from consciously responding to something. Because once you can learn how to increase the gap even a little bit between the trigger, maybe there's a better way to call this, the stimulus increasing the gap between the stimulus and what would typically be a reaction. And what we want to do is get that gap just wide enough, even if it's a quarter of a second more than it was before, for us to think about a response that we can put in place. And so the very first skill you need to learn in order to create that gap is personal regulation. And so typically with my clients, I am teaching them very, very early on long extended breathwork practices that they're going to be doing first thing in the morning to start bringing their nervous system out of essentially a survival state, a contracted energetic state, into a much more expanded and open state early in the day. So this is like priming our nervous system to, very much like a guitar string. You know how when a guitar string gets too tight and we press on it, it's more likely to snap and break, right? Well, that's like our nervous system. So we want to pre-prime that nervous system to be able to have more laxity to pressure that it takes in. And this is the threat responses. If the threat responses starts to come at us very hard, and we can increase our capacity to deal with these threats, these stresses, and these things that would have typically thrown us through a complete unconscious programmed default state loop before, we are doing better. So if it means that when your girlfriend says she's going to go out, for example, with the girls on Friday night, and typically you would have spun down a complete spiral of starting fights and arguments to make her stay and make her text you all night angrily, because to you, that feels more like safety, because if you know that she's texting you, it means she's not banging the bartender. And instead, you're able to text her once or twice as compared to 10 times like you might have before. Well, you know, it might not seem like much and you might still feel like you're failing, but that's still a little improvement. And that would increase a little bit of that gap for you to consciously think of what you can do in that moment. So for most people, the easiest thing you could possibly learn is taking a 90-second break. This could change your life in every way, shape, and form. And so if that means, for example, let me give you a great example. And I know I'm kind of blabbering on a little bit here, but I remember one time when I was dating a girl where this was when I was just coming out of my healing stages, and I was still learning how to integrate it into a relationship. And every single time, I was always doing a lot of cleaning. It's just something I always love to do. It's calming for me. I can listen to a podcast. But she would come home from work, and typically I'd be like doing the dishes, making sure the house is really clean, because I've always worked from my computer. So I want to make sure she comes home to a clean house. And she would come up to me while I was like doing something and say, "Hey, do you have a minute to talk?" Now, this was just a very respectful thing for her to do. Just to, you know, I've got my one headphone in, but my anxious brain goes, she's going to break up with you right now. And so my immediate thought, well, my strategy that I put in place was, we're going to take one deep breath in and we're going to take one long extended exhale. And there's a lot of science behind why that's helpful, and we can maybe go into that another day. And then I would immediately tell myself, I'd give myself a little mantra and say, you are safe, you are secure, and you are loved regardless of what happens. And then I would smile. And for me, this was like an 8-second moment. And sometimes if I got really activated, I would say, you know what? Absolutely. Let's talk. Let me just run to the washroom real quick, and I'll be right back so I can focus on what you have to say. Now, realistically, I'm not actually going to the bathroom. I'm taking 90 seconds to not freak the fuck out. I'm just going to go take a few breaths in the bathroom is really what I'm going to do right now. And then I'm going to come back. But that ability to be able to pause, whether that's for 5 seconds or whether it's take a step away to come back if it's really severe for you, can completely change the outcome of anything that comes out of that person's mouth or your mouth in the next second afterwards. So I know you guys might laugh at oh, just breathe. Everybody says just breathe, but it's actually deeper than that, because this is what allows you to stack the skills on top. And that's my TED Talk. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. And to be honest, everything that you just shared, you put into practice a lot of what we've been talking about in this episode, like having a mantra, having affirmations that affirm the new reality or what you want to be living, taking that time to really take care of yourself and become more self-aware. And yes, and breath work, absolutely, because there's a big difference between a response and a reaction. And it is a trigger. I know you didn't want to call it a trigger. That stimulus is a trigger. If someone's like, I want to talk to you, and you're not sure what they want to say, and you're worried they're going to break up with you, or vice versa, your trigger is, I'm going to not respond to this person for a really long time because it's too much pressure. It's almost like doing the opposite of what you would normally do, but from a place of, wait, okay, I feel triggered. Let me take care of myself. I have all these tools, and there's so many. Breath work is one of them too. The mantra, all of it together. And the reason why breath works, so we don't have to go into the deep science, but just so people know, it's like if you change your breath, which is automatic, into a choice of something different, you're already doing that pattern of making a different choice. You're going and riding above what the body's naturally doing, just without you thinking about it. And then you're interrupting that. So that pattern interrupt that you're doing with your breath, you can then just do in real life. And I agree that so many things we have to learn in relationship, which is why I always say it's a journey to our beloved. Every single relationship serves the next one or serves that one. And really, we can stay in relationship with someone forever as long as both people are committed to growth and evolution and transformation. And recently, on one of the posts that I posted about a past podcast, a woman wrote, I'm 3 years patient with an avoidant, right? And, and so
I love that.
And there's always that question, like, how do you know to stay or go? And it's such a fine line. And we've talked about this in different ways, but let's say, because like we talked about with the puppy, you can't just like expect like in one moment, like decision to be different. And now you're magically different. It is a process because there's an unlearning and unprogramming, a reprogramming, a repatterning, and you can only do it in relationship. It's like, how do you know when to leave, when to stay? And for me, I think it's always about, is the person committed to their growth and evolution? Are they actually doing the work? Are they doing the healing work? Do I see incremental changes? And it is something that I think the heart really can only decide. And I think also at some point you just kind of have enough of like, okay, I gave you so many chances and like still you're not patterning. And it's true that we're all on different timelines. So to be like, you're not doing it fast enough, of course, it sounds not like unconditional love. And at the same time, if you're really committed to your growth and you're transforming, that there's this. So I'm curious what you would say, but for me, I think it's really case by case basis. And for me, it's about not only the willingness, there has to be the willingness, but then there actually has to be the effort and the actual incremental transformation happening. And that agreements have to be honored. So you can say like, okay, let's make these rules and these agreements. And when these things happen, this is how we're going to handle it. And if the person just can't follow the plan or honor the agreements or make the changes after however many chances you feel are within your heart, then you can kind of feel like, okay, enough is enough. And that's part of the self-love and the self-worth too, because 3 years patient with an avoidant, like, is there change? Is this person still avoidant?
Oh, I've worked with people where they tell me 21 years. And I go, hey, we need to set some thresholds here. Some boundaries need to come into play at a certain point here. Actually, there was somebody just commenting on one of my posts the other day saying, oh, you don't know. You're talking from the perspective of a man. You don't know what it's like to like go through this. And she was giving all these reasons. And I'm like, you're putting genders on things that are actually like very much just human things. And I felt really bad because all the things that I can't remember what she was listing. I was hoping it would come up as I was saying it, but all of these things that she were listing was actually just reasons, which it's really interesting. One of my coaches, his name is Nick Comedina. He says, typically the reasons that we don't move forward are the exact same reasons that we can move forward. We just have to flip it. And so for example of this is like, I don't go to the gym because I don't have time. And we can easily in that moment, in that reason that you created, or really in the excuse that you created, we can find the reason many times. And so it's like sunk cost fallacy, right? Of, okay, so I've been in this relationship for 5 years. Because I've been in it for 5 years, this is the excuse. I should stay for this exact reason. I've already put so much time, money, effort, all these things into it. But that could be the exact reason. You know what? I've already put 5 years into it. That's exactly the reason why I shouldn't put one more. And so this is kind of where, again, the realistic self-love aspect needs to come in. And quite frankly, I don't expect people to be able to do this for themselves. This is why I believe that we need coaches and mentors in our life. Not would like to. I mean, in every financial way possible, whether that's you're a part of group coaching programs, any program where you are going to have people mirror back to you the things that you are saying are so critically important as we live in this digital age where we are not in the groups and communities that we used to be in around the people that would call our bullshit and for us. Because nowadays we're able to just go along with ours so much easier than we ever have been. 3 days ago, one of my, I know I've been name dropping a lot of coaches. I like to work with a group of different guys who can all help me with different things. A fellow that I was talking with the other day, his name is Jason Horecki. He asked me a couple of very simple questions, and I was sitting there in tears because there was some blind spots that he pointed out to me that I didn't even realize that were coming back up at this new level that I was at. And for example, it was childhood scarcity around money. As the business is growing and I'm helping more and more people and you're meeting new and new levels, all of a sudden these childhood scarcities come back at this new level that I wasn't expecting. And all of a sudden I'm having to face blind spots that I didn't realize were there. And so first and foremost, give yourself some grace. Give yourself some grace if you're in a situation where it's in the back of your mind and you're sitting there going, I just don't know. And talk to somebody. It's really important that you do that. And I'm not pitching you on coaching right now. I genuinely, from my heart, think that the most important thing you can do is stop trying to do everything yourself, okay? Because I'm a coach, Nikki's a coach, and we don't just do things ourselves. We always are talking to people who are helping us in these situations. Don't think that we're holier than thou or all knowledgeable gurus or anything like that. That's not what it is whatsoever. We're just as human as you are. However, once you've given yourself that grace to look at the situation realistically and go, damn, I really do need to make a change for myself. You know, I like the word that you used before there, which was willingness is what you used. Capacity was the second one I was going to bring up, actually. Are they actually willing? Obviously, this is massive. So are they willing to work to regulate themselves so they don't tear a hole in the relationship as soon as it's in a peaceful place? Because that's all they know how to do because they're addicted to chaos. Are they willing to learn how to repair with you? Are they willing to follow through on small agreements? If these lines are trending towards more safety and more respect, hey, yeah, keep going with this. But if contempt keeps showing up and honesty keeps breaking down and the repairs never happen or they happen too late, like if you're in a serious relationship, that repair shouldn't take more than 24 hours. It really shouldn't. And if that's taking forever and it's taking maybe up to a week, hey, that's a big chunk of the year that's already gone to repairs that should have happened more maturely. Or if one person is just refusing to do the basics and they don't have the capacity to, look, this container is not a healthy place for your love to be stored in. And so that's when you might want to leave with, a shred of integrity in place. And integrity is simply just who I am in my story and in silence when nobody is watching. If you say you're somebody that values X, Y, and Z things, and I have to have these, but then they don't show up in your relationship, in your business, in your friendships, you are inevitably going to put those things off because you're not going to trust your own opinion on things. And that's where self-respect starts to fall apart. And so there's a million different factors that we could go into here around when you should go, or any of these things. But I think what you need to see is it trending? And maybe you need to, depending on the length of the relationship, set a threshold of like, I need 60 days. I need to see these changes in 60 days. You don't maybe tell them that, but you need to set that for yourself. Because these are the little promises that we have to make to ourselves. Like, hey, rescue puppy, to use that example. It's me, your conscious self, the aware self, the version of you who's looking down at you, who is responsible for you. And I don't want you to go through this for more than another 30 to 60 to 90 days. Here are the things that we need to look for based on your values, based on the things that you need, not want, need, actually deeply need. And if these things are not tracking towards that within the next whatever time frame it is, depending on the length of the relationship, We need to hold true to that. And if you don't, that's how you end up being that woman who's, I think, in her late 60s, commenting on my Instagram how I've basically put off my boundaries for the past 18 years with somebody. I don't want to see you in that place. But the thing is she did those, I need to see these changes in 1 year, year after year after year after year. And then eventually you're not choosing yourself anymore. You're just choosing the excuse. And I know that sounds harsh maybe, but there's my thoughts.
Yeah. And also that brings us into, we're going to now start to close out this episode, but we're going to go in the bonus episode. We're going to talk about tips to support greater self-worth. And essentially that's what this is about. When you stay and you cross your own boundaries, you're not honoring your worth. And so I'm really looking forward to our bonus episode. And Denon, thank you so much for being here today. And please share with our audience where they can find you.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's funny how so much of this conversation about relationships all came back to personal growth in our relationship to self. We didn't even get into the nitty-gritties of relationships, but I think this is the part that people miss. And so I'm really happy we had this conversation. So people can find me on Instagram at Denon Maximchuk. Good luck spelling that. So check it out in the show notes. And I don't actually have any presence on any other social media. I'm about to start a TikTok. We're going to jump on YouTube soon. But right now I'm a one-man show trying to run a full client load, social medias and all the other things. So I would appreciate your support over on Instagram. And again, thank you so much, Nikki.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll include all the links to connect with Denon. And we'll see you inside the bonus content. Thank you, Denon. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dr. Nikki Starr Show. Please like this podcast and share it with anyone you feel would benefit. Subscribe to the podcast to receive bonus content, and remember, every Monday the video version goes live on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being on the ascension path with me and for doing this great work.